Hello and welcome to another episode of Mike and Dave's Hi-Fi Riff. I'm Mike Evans.
And I'm David Price.
And David, this week on Hi-Fi Riff, what are we going to be reviewing?
It's the AURALiC Altair G1 DAC, streaming DAC preamp, isn't it?
It is, indeed. Look, here's one I made earlier.
Yeah, that's very clever of you, Mike.
We have one here.
Yeah.
And it's a rather fetching looking piece of equipment, don't you think?
It is. I think it's a very nice piece of design.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I really like the style. It's got a, obviously we're not plugged in here. It's got a very nice colour display,
Yep.
Which I do quite like. The control on the front is the sweetest, smoothest one I've twiddled in a long time. It's
I know
very
you've
good
twiddled
indeed.
a lot of them over the years, Mike.
Careful. And it's very functional. It's got huge amounts of connectivity in the back, which is just brilliant.
Yeah.
So you've got our balanced outputs, normal outputs,
Yeah.
Toslink in, coax, all the usual
Digital
kind of
inputs and all that stuff.
USB, yeah.
Bluetooth and
Plays pretty much everything,
Yep.
doesn't it? It plays
Ethernet, Wi-Fi
Yeah.
Connectivity.
Rune ready,
Yeah.
Rune endpoint. So yeah, very good. Really like this. I've had this for a little bit now, and I've been listening to it. And for the price, which is
2,300 roughly.
Great British pounds,
That's right.
I think it's a bit of a cracker.
Yeah,
I think it's super.
I mean, I think there's a sort of price point developing now, around £2,500 for do-it-all one-box streaming DAC preamp solutions, isn't there?
Yes.
And
yeah.
we did the Naim Unity headphone amp, didn't we?
We did.
HE.
The HE, the
Unity
headphone edition.
Atom
That's
HE.
right. Yes.
And that's about 2007.
It's just gone up.
Has it?
Yeah,
Right.
it's about
Yeah.
2.7 now. So a little bit dearer than
Yeah.
the AURALiC.
But this would be very much in the same vein as that.
You'd want to listen to both of them
Yeah.
and see which one you prefer.
Yeah.
AURALIC's got a trick up its sleeve though, because it's sort of quietly expandable.
Yeah.
So you can put, for example, I think it's something like £400. You can put a 200 gig SSD in here.
Yeah.
So you've got your own sort of music centre, if you
It's
like.
a mini Melco,
It's
isn't
a
it?
mini Melco. It is. I hadn't thought of that, but
Yeah.
you're absolutely right,
Yeah.
isn't it? That's exactly
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Easy to set up, easy to use. With one bugbear of an exception, they've dropped the Android support, which is a
Who
bit
cares?
annoying. I do. So I had to dig out an iPad to sort of get the app up and running. But
It's very brave of you, Mike.
I know.
So-
There we are.
Yeah.
But once I'd done that, it was sort of set up. And
Yeah.
it worked absolutely fine.
Yeah.
So, and I was using Rune as my main streaming point. Actually, I've got to say, David, I did just sort of plug my phone in to the USB input here. So Samsung phone, and the Samsung phone is pretty rubbish really when it comes to sound, to be perfectly honest. But there is an app which is called USB Audio Player Pro,
Yep.
and that kind of ignores the app in the DAC, I beg your pardon, in the Samsung, and it says, do you want to use the AURALiC as your streamer?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as your DAC. So I did that, and it worked a treat.
Yep.
So actually, the phone as a source, because I've got some FLAC files on my phone,
Yep.
and the AURALiC sounded really good.
Yeah.
Sounded really good. Sounded better than streaming, strangely enough, but we found that with the Melco.
Yeah.
So if you're playing from a hard drive,
Yep.
it sounds better than if you're streaming, via your Wi-Fi or,
Yeah.
or through Cobas or Tidal or
Yep.
whatever it may be. And the other thing which caught me out, and I don't know how easy it is to see this on our little video here, but there's two antennas at the back.
Yeah.
And if you don't plug those in, you can't pick up any Wi-Fi at all.
Yeah.
You literally sit it on the router,
Yeah.
and it couldn't pick up the signal.
Yeah.
So sort of top tip is make sure your antennas are tweaked.
Yes.
and
Yes. Well,
it should
I'll
work.
keep that in mind for future reference, Mike.
Absolutely, it's all these important things you find out on
Yes.
Mike and Dave's Hi-Fi Riff.
I know, you're a
Don't find it
fountain
in there.
of something or other.
Quite, yes. So really like the sound. I think that this is am I right in saying it's an ESS DAC?
Yeah, so I think it's the 9038Q2M.
Really?
Yes, that's one
And
I
you
wrote.
call me a fountain.
I've called you worse.
You really have today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a ESS Sabre DAC. It's a good DAC. So in the great scheme of hi-fi things, you know, opinion is divided about ESS DACs. Some people love them, some people hate them. I'm sort of somewhere in the middle. But I've heard some very nice sounding DACs, with those ESS DAC chips in, certainly.
We've talked about this before, haven't we? Because there's sort of two schools of thought here, aren't there? There's the people like Chord, for example, who make their own DACs from scratch. Lynn just getting into that market with the organic, DCS, etc. Or there's people who try and tweak existing ones. So this is what AURALiC are doing here. They've sort of got a bought-in engine, if you like, a bought-in DAC, and then they're sort of using their magic around that. I think they've done a pretty damn good job.
Yeah, I mean, I think, AURALiC do some substantially more expensive streaming front ends, but this is their kind of, budget maybe is not the right word, but it's their sort of entry-level, do-it-all, one-box streaming DAC preamp solution. And I think for the money, it's hard to fault, certainly in terms of build quality. I mean, you look at the beautiful casework, it's not that far off a kind of Lin Climax DSM.
No, it's not. It's
certainly,
gorgeous,
in how it looks from outside.
Yeah, it's really well made. You can feel it.
Beautifully made, yeah. I know you're a Naim guy, but you could almost say it feels more swish than the Naim Unity Atom. It feels like a kind of budget. Well, that's the wrong expression. Sort of. A Japanese high end that sort of that isn't. It's got a real kind of high end feel to it, and if your friends didn't know what it was, they'd think that you'd sort of won the pools or something. I think.
Yes.
Very nice indeed. Beautifully put together and finished. It's absolutely top notch.
No, I agree. And they've had a lot of history in doing this as well, because they were kind of one of the very first people on the streaming boat, weren't they?
Yeah, they weren't quite as early as Lin, but they were certainly very early to market. They were kind of there long before most companies got into streaming, and they've done their own streaming platform and their own sort of hardware and software, and even today many companies sort of buy in streaming platforms, chipsets from Stream Unlimited and those kind of generic suppliers. Most streamers are Stream Unlimited based.
Sure.
But AURALiC did their own streaming architecture, and so it's not like they've just sort of chucked some generic circuit board in a box. They've really worked on it.
Software wise, they've been obviously thought about that as well. With our little control on the side, it gives you lots and lots of submenus you can access. There are some filters in here, so you can change the sound quality. You can have a softer sound or a more dynamic sound. I didn't, to be honest. In fact, when I got this, first thing I did was just factory reset it. Factory reset it to the standard, flat response curve, and that kind of way I went, and I thought it was great. I didn't really want to do any other tweaks with it. I enjoyed the sound quality straight out of the box.
That's not like you, Mike.
No, that's very true. It's very true. But
you are Mr. Submenu, aren't you?
Very much so. And I wouldn't say that it's probably like having a built-in graphic equalizer or something like that. I would imagine they're very subtle tweaks.
Yeah, pretty.
But I plugged this into a power amp, and just a pair of speakers, and away we go. And it's a sort of it's as simple as that, really. And I think it's a good enough preamp in here to work with most systems. And probably, and this is kind of like one of the interesting points, is if you've already got a pre-power, what would you do? Would you ditch your preamp, or would you use the one in here? And I think the answer to me almost always would be use the one in the streamer, because for me then you're putting one less component in the path. And that always seems to make sense to me. So
I mean, I think unless you've got a very particular preamp that you really love, like a Finestra or a Townsend Allegri or something like that, then there's a lot of appeal for something like this, because it's not the greatest preamp in the world. You can do better, but still it's very good for the money, and the DAC functionality is very good for the money, and the streaming functionality is very good for the money. It sort of makes its own case for itself. There's really no need to have extra boxes.
Sure.
If you're if you're buying, one of these, I think, unless you've got...
I was going to say, providing this is your only source, because you've got no other analog preamp, analog line levels in.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, your lovely cassette tech, which we did the riff on a couple of weeks ago, you couldn't use with this, sadly.
Yeah. No phono inputs either.
No phono inputs, no.
In terms of turntable, by which that's what I mean.
And so say for example the Hi-Fi Rose, which has got a whole bunch of different inputs, and it's a proper preamp section as well as the streamer. See, for my ears, this sounds a lot better. It seems to be more purposeful. And the Rose is a bit of a sort of does everything. But I like the fact that this is a little bit more. I've got one job to do, and this is it. And I'm going to get all of your lovely music collection from the the cloud or from your server or from your phone, and I'm going to put it into your power amp. And I thought that was quite cool.
I think that's one of much of the appeal of this is it's kind of one-stop shop, isn't it?
It is.
For everything. Unless you're into analog, if you're basically a digital guy, then it does everything. It looks lovely. It's really well built. And it's not just on the outside as well. The component quality is very good inside. There's a sort of decent toroidal transformer. It's very carefully laid out inside. It's all I think sort of very high standards across the board for 2,300 quid. It's not a DCS Bartok at 12 grand or whatever, and it's not a Lin Climax DSM-3 for 30, but for what it does at the price, it's an awful lot.
It really is.
And the app as well, I think, is very good. It works seamlessly. I've used this a lot, and I've used loads of streamers over the years. I've been reviewing millions of them, and so many of them crash. The apps and so on fall off the network, and they do this and they do that, but you can't play any music. But I've not had that problem with this at all.
So, no, sure.
It's obvious it's not their first streamer. Put it that way.
Yes,
they've they're old hands at it. So I mean, the only issue is. Would you spend the extra and get the Naim Unity Atom HE, or because the name is a slightly different feel, isn't it?
It is. Now, without any disrespect to the AURALiC, I would go for the Naim. Because I think the Naim has arguably got a better preamp section. And obviously, if you're a headphone listener, it's a no-brainer because it's got this dedicated headphone section as well. But I think the Naim sounds great. I really do. Bit more expensive, but I think it's worth the extra £400.
Yeah, it is a bit more expensive, isn't it?
You've also got a couple of inputs, a couple of analog inputs as well. Which for me, now I've got a Sony ES tuner. It's quite nice to sort of plug an analog radio in from time to time and listen to that. I know there's loads of digital radio stations all sort of baked into this and baked into the app, but there's nothing quite like having an aerial on your roof and tuning that in, and I wouldn't be able to listen to those with this.
There's nothing quite like interstation mush and falling off the signal and stuff like that, is there, Mike? I know.
I like it with FM radio.
Yes, and I do. Going up on the roof in the middle of December, trying to twiddle your aerial so it'll reach the Oxford FM transmitter for whatever. So
I know you've got one as well. So. Don't, because I know you feel my pain. It's sort of one of these things, isn't it? But no, a great bit of kit. So listening wise, listen to sort of some standards, some of the music which we played. Particularly, it works really well with well produced music. And I know that sounds obvious, but it's not always the case. It doesn't always sort of bring it out. So albums like sort of Steely Dan albums. Two Against Nature, things like that, which are really nicely recorded, sound terrific. But then if you go into kind of the acid test of finding some albums which are, say, all digital and a little bit bright, and now from my experience, the chipset in here, the Sabre chipsets can be a little bit bright in some systems. I didn't find any problems with that at all with the AURALiC. I felt it handled things really well. So even throwing tracks at it which potentially could be ear bleeding. it wasn't at all.
Yeah, I mean,
Really well.
I think it's pretty smooth, actually. I think it's very smooth, sophisticated, and doesn't sound like a budget piece of hi-fi at all. I mean, I agree with you. Maybe, I mean, the name is a bit unfair because it's quite a bit more expensive, but possibly there's a tiny bit more detail on the name. But I'm not even sure the sound quality difference would make the decision about which one you got. I think it's kind of, the particular functionality of each unit as well, and the fact that AURALiC, which is a relatively unknown brand, certainly in the UK, can compete with an absolutely cracking Naim product, who've sort of had, much of the British specialist hi-fi industry to themselves for many years in some ways, haven't they? So that shows how good this is, I think.
Yes. Yes.
And, it actually feels, I think, swisher and more expensive to use as well, in a way.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but, we'd always say try and hear the two in a shop, in a hi-fi dealer if you can.
But this should definitely be on your shortlist.
Absolutely.
If you're in the market for a streamer under 3,000, this should without a doubt be on your shortlist.
Well, I think exactly that. I think it's very hard to fault.
Yes.
It's nice in itself, and it's hard to find anything wrong with at the price. And
yes.
You can see why the brand has really kind of started popping and making a kind of big impression on the market, because why wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sort of if it were a car, then it would be something that's really solid, really well made.
Yeah.
Lots of whistles and bells. Really economical, with a really long warranty.
Yeah.
And something and looks pretty stylish.
Yeah.
And I think that's the car which we're all looking for, which probably doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And actually, AURALiC have made it in streamer form.
Well, I'm thinking sort of entry-level Lexus as an analogy.
That's not bad, is
maybe.
it? That's not bad. Yeah,
So,
with everything there, and it's gonna just work.
Yeah.
And and in fact, that is a great analogy, because the Lexus tend to be the Lexus owners tend to be sort of quietly smug, if you like, because they know they bought a really
Have you got a
good
Lexus,
car.
Mike?
I would be.
Have you got an entry-level Lexus, Mike?
See, Lexus drivers are also incredibly modest as well, and don't keep their cards very close to their chest. For example, if you said to me, "Have you got an AURALiC streamer?" I go, "Maybe."
Yes.
Excellent. So there we are. So that's our lovely AURALiC Altair G1 digital audio streamer there, and our Riff. Thoroughly enjoyed using that as well. That's been a pleasure. And Hi-Fi Riffometer score. What do you reckon? What would you give this? I think it's going to be fairly high up there.
I mean, it's at the usual proviso is it's at the price. It's not in the great scheme of things. It's not. It doesn't sound as good as a DCS Vivaldi at 75 grand or whatever. It's. I mean, to me, I think it's going to be a 9 again, because the sound quality wise at the price, it's hard to think of anything really appreciably better. And even if you do prefer the Naim, then it's a bit more expensive, isn't it? And it's just got it does so much in such a nice, neat package, I think. So that's going to be my...
Sure. Well, look, it's not often I score less than you.
Okay.
But I'm going to give it 8.5, and it's going to drop that half point just on the fact that just one analog input would have been good, so I could play my lovely Sony tuner through it. So my 730 ES tuner. So which we must do a review on at some point. So
if we must.
So there we are. A really top score for the AURALiC. Lovely bit of kit. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope you've enjoyed our episode of Mike and Dave's Hi-Fi Riff. So thank you very much for watching, and we will see you at the next one. Thanks very much.
Bye.